My family abandoned me in the hospital after an accident nearly killed me. 3 years later, they came begging me to lie for them. But the truth had already come out, and it destroyed them in front of everyone. I'm 24 years old. I study engineering at a university that's like 3 hours away from where my family lives. And honestly, I need to get this story off my chest because I've been carrying this alone for 3 years. And just now, a few weeks ago, the truth came out and everything exploded in a way I never imagined. The thing is that my family basically abandoned me when I needed them most. And when I say abandoned, I'm not exaggerating or being dramatic. They literally left me alone in the hospital after an accident that almost killed me. And then for 3 years, they told the entire family a completely false version of what happened, where I was the villain of the story. But well, I guess I should start from the beginning, so all of this makes sense. When I was 21 years old, I was in my third year of college. You know, normal student life, classes, assignments, exams, those things. I've always been pretty independent. Actually, since I was a kid, I practiced mixed martial arts. It was my way of letting off steam and staying focused. And I think that gave me a strong personality. Like I didn't let myself get carried away easily by emotions. My family was normal, I guess, or at least that's what I thought. My parents, Paul and Sharon, were always a bit distant with me, but I never thought it was anything serious. That was just how they were. My sister, Victoria, is 5 years younger than me, and I don't know. I always had the feeling that my parents preferred her, but I tried not to think about it too much because, what was I going to do? It was my family, and that was that. So we get to that day. The day that changed absolutely everything. It was a Friday afternoon. I had just finished my classes and was in my apartment when I got a message from my mom saying that Victoria was in labor and they were on their way to the hospital. My niece, Isabella, was about to be born, and I was super excited. Like I really wanted to be there for that important moment. I didn't tell my parents anything, but I decided to drive to the hospital to surprise my sister, bring her some things I had bought for the baby, flowers, be the present and caring aunt. At the time, it seemed like the best idea in the world. I wanted to show them that I cared, that I wanted to be part of those important family moments. I left my apartment around 6 in the evening. The hospital was about 3 hours away. I figured I'd get there around 9:30 at the latest. Traffic wasn't too bad. I was driving calm, listening to music, thinking about how beautiful Isabella would be and what it would be like to be an aunt for the first time. I had been on the road for about 2.5 hours. I was pretty close to the hospital, when out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, a truck cut in front of me. I didn't even have 2 seconds to react. The guy was going full speed, ran a red light, and crashed directly into the driver's side of my car. The impact was so strong that my car flipped like 3 times. Or that's what they told me later because I lost consciousness almost immediately. What happened after I found out in pieces? Because obviously I was unconscious. Turns out the truck driver, a guy named Andrew Parker, was completely drunk, like 3 times over the legal blood alcohol limit, and had been driving erratically all over the highway before hitting me. Several witnesses saw it and called emergency services. When the paramedics arrived, I was trapped in the car, unconscious, bleeding, with fractures in several parts of my body. They had to get me out with specialized equipment because the car was completely destroyed, and they rushed me to the nearest hospital, which ironically was the same hospital where my sister was giving birth, although I had no idea about that at the time because, I was unconscious and fighting for my life. This is where the story gets really dark, and when you start to understand why I'm so angry. Emergency services, obviously, contacted my parents as my emergency contacts. They told them I had been in a serious accident, that I was in the hospital, that they needed to come immediately. And you know what my parents did? They said they couldn't come because their other daughter was giving birth, and to please not call them again that night. They literally told the paramedics not to bother them. I was there, in the hospital, with head trauma, broken ribs, a fractured leg, my left arm shattered, and my parents basically said they had more important things to do. I spent 3 days in intensive care. 3 days. And my parents didn't show up once. When I finally woke up, I was completely disoriented, with unbearable pain all over my body, connected to 1,000 machines, and the first thing I asked about was my family. The nurses told me they had been contacted but hadn't come. At first I thought maybe there was some mistake, that maybe they hadn't been notified properly, because, what parents don't come when their daughter almost dies? But no, it wasn't a mistake. They simply didn't want to come. My friends were the ones who saved me, literally and figuratively. When they found out about the accident, they organized among themselves, came to the hospital, took turns being with me, brought my stuff from my apartment, contacted my professors to explain the situation. One of my friends, who was studying law, even helped me with all the insurance paperwork and the legal case against the drunk driver. Between all of them, they paid my medical expenses because it turned out the insurance didn't cover everything and my parents didn't offer a single cent. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Without my friends, I probably would have ended up on the streets or something worse. A week after the accident, 1 week, my parents finally called me. They didn't come to the hospital. They just called. And you know what was the first thing they told me? That it had been very irresponsible of me to drive that night, that I should have let them know I was going there, that the accident was basically my fault for not being careful. My mom, Sharon, told me word for word, "What were you thinking, Natalie? You knew it was an important night for your sister and you still decided to drive at night? Of course something bad was going to happen." As if I had planned for a drunk person to crash into me. As if it was my fault that I almost got killed. I tried to explain to them. I told them I was on my way to the hospital to surprise Victoria, to be with them in that important moment. But my dad, Paul, interrupted me and told me to stop making excuses, that they had to focus on Victoria and the baby, that Isabella needed all their attention, and that I was already an adult and should learn to handle my own problems. They hung up after like 10 minutes without even asking how I was. If I needed anything, nothing. They just blamed me and told me not to bother them, because they were busy with the baby. I was in the hospital for about 2 more weeks. The first weeks were horrible. The pain was unbearable. I could barely move. I had constant nightmares about the accident. The doctors told me I was going to need months of physical therapy, that I had lost a lot of mobility in my left arm, that I probably would never practice martial arts at the same level as before. It was devastating. You know, that was my passion, my way of letting off steam. And now they were telling me I had basically lost everything. During all that time, my parents didn't come once. Victoria didn't either. None of them bothered to visit me, to call to see how I was. Nothing. I saw other people in the hospital with their families, with their parents there supporting them, and I only had my friends, who, being honest, were incredible, but they weren't my family. You know what I mean? There's something about not having your parents there when you almost die that changes you. Completely. That makes you question everything about yourself. When I finally left the hospital, my friends helped me move temporarily to a ground floor apartment because I couldn't climb stairs. I started physical therapy 3 times a week. It was a long and painful process, physically and emotionally. I had to take a semester off from college. I lost my athletic scholarship, obviously, because I couldn't compete anymore, and basically, my life as I knew it was completely destroyed. And all that time, my parents were conspicuously absent. About a month after the accident, my mom sent me a text message, asking how I was and saying they hoped to see me soon. As if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't completely abandoned me. I responded that I needed space, that I was very hurt physically and emotionally, and she answered something like, "Well, let us know when you're ready to be part of the family again," as if I was the one who had decided to distance myself, as if I was the one who had to apologize. That was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. I made a decision that at the time seemed like the only option I had to stay sane. I cut all contact with them. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from social media, asked my friends not to give them information about me. For 3 years, I had absolutely no contact with my parents or Victoria. It was hard at first, because it's your family. But honestly, after a few months, I started to feel better. More at peace, like I could finally breathe without having that constant feeling of disappointment and abandonment. I focused on recovering, on finishing my degree, on rebuilding my life. Physical therapy eventually worked. I recovered quite a bit of mobility in my arm, although it never went back to how it was before. I found other ways to exercise that didn't cause me as much pain. I made new friends, dated some people, basically tried to create a life where I didn't need my family to be happy. And it worked. More or less. Obviously, there was always a part of me that hurt, that missed having a normal family, but I learned to live with that. Everything was relatively fine until about a month and a half ago. Turns out my parents organized a big family dinner to celebrate that Victoria had gotten a promotion at her job. They invited all the extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. During that dinner, according to what I found out later, my parents told their version of why I wasn't there, of why we hadn't spoken for 3 years. And their version, obviously, was completely false. They told everyone that I had a minor accident 3 years ago. Nothing serious, just some scratches, but that I had become super dramatic and demanding. And that I expected them to leave Victoria alone during labor, to come see me for an accident that was nothing. That I had gotten angry because they didn't leave my sister and the baby to run to my side, and that's why I had decided to cut contact with them. Basically, they painted me as a jealous, selfish, and manipulative sister who couldn't stand that Victoria had a baby, and that's why I had decided to distance myself from the family. They said they had tried to contact me 1,000 times to fix things, but that I refused to forgive them for something that wasn't even their fault. The family believed it all. Like, everyone thought I was this horrible person who had abandoned my family over a tantrum. My aunts and uncles, my cousins, everyone started criticizing me, saying I was immature. How could I be so cruel to my parents after everything they had done for me? Nobody questioned the story. Nobody thought that maybe there was more than one side to all of this. But turns out I have an aunt, Evelyn, who was always a bit more observant than the rest. She noticed some inconsistencies in the story, like my parents couldn't explain well which hospital it was, or how long I was hospitalized. Basic things that, if it really had been a minor accident, they should remember. So, Evelyn decided to look for me on her own, found my profile on a social network I hadn't blocked, and sent me a private message. The message said something like, "Hi, Natalie. I know we haven't talked in years, but I need to know the truth about what happened 3 years ago. Your mom and dad told us a version at the family dinner, but there are things that don't add up, and I want to hear your side of the story." At first, I didn't know whether to respond. Like I had gone 3 years without contact with anyone in my family, and honestly, I didn't know if I wanted to reopen that wound. But something in her message sounded genuine, like she really wanted to know the truth and not just gossip. I responded and told her everything. Everything. From deciding to drive that night to surprise Victoria, the horrible accident with the drunk driver, the weeks in the hospital, how my parents rejected the emergency calls and told the paramedics not to bother them, how they didn't come to see me even once for weeks, how they blamed me for the accident when they finally called me, how I had to depend completely on my friends to survive, the months of physical therapy, losing my scholarship, having to take a semester off, everything. I sent her photos of my scars, copies of medical reports I still had saved, old text messages where my parents basically told me it was my fault and that they couldn't help me because they were busy with the baby. Evelyn was in absolute shock. She told me she couldn't believe my parents had done something like that it was inhumane. How was it possible they had abandoned their own daughter that way? She asked me if she could share the truth with the rest of the family, and honestly, at that point, I had nothing left to lose. So I told her, yes, to do what she thought was right. The truth spread through the entire family like wildfire. Evelyn showed the evidence to other aunts and uncles. They showed it to more relatives, and within days, everyone knew what had really happened. My parents obviously denied everything at first, said I was exaggerating, that I was distorting the story to make them look bad. But the evidence was irrefutable. Medical reports don't lie. The text messages were there. Everything was documented. The family started distancing themselves from my parents. People who had defended them before now saw them completely differently. Some aunts and uncles told them directly that what they had done was unforgivable. How could they live with themselves after abandoning their daughter when she almost died? My cousins stopped responding to their messages. Family tension was through the roof. Then came Isabella's 3rd birthday. My parents and Victoria organized a big party, invited the whole family like they always did for Isabella's birthdays. But this time, most people declined the invitation. My aunts and uncles sent excuses like they had other commitments, that they couldn't go. Basically, nobody wanted to be there after knowing the truth. The party that was going to be this big family celebration was turning into a disaster. And then, about 2 weeks ago, my parents showed up at my door. They didn't call ahead, didn't send a message, just showed up on a Saturday morning, knocking insistently until I opened. When I opened the door and saw them standing there after 3 years, honestly, I didn't know what to feel. It was like a mix of shock, anger, pain, all together. My dad started talking immediately, saying we needed to talk, that I had to help them with a family problem. I asked them what they wanted. Like, what did they really expect after 3 years of absolute silence? And you know what they told me? That I needed to call everyone in the family and tell them I had exaggerated the story of the accident. That actually they had supported me, but that I was remembering things wrong because of the trauma. That I needed to lie. To the whole family. So they would come back to Isabella's birthday party. They were literally asking me to lie to save their reputation and my niece's birthday party. My mom started with the emotional spiel, saying things like, "Think about Isabella. She's not to blame for any of this. She deserves to have a nice party with her whole family. You can't ruin her birthday just because you're angry with us." As if I was the one who had ruined something. As if I was the one who had started all this with my lies. My dad added that if I really loved them, if I really cared about the family, I would do this for them. That it was the least I could do. Something inside me just exploded. It was 3 years of pain, of abandonment, of feeling like I was worthless to them, and now they had the audacity to show up at my door asking me to save them from the consequences of their own actions. I told them to leave, that I wasn't going to lie for them, that they had to live with what they had done. My dad started getting aggressive, saying I was being selfish, that I had always been dramatic, and this just proved Victoria was right about me. It was at that moment that something in me broke completely. All the composure I had maintained, all the calm, just disappeared. I pushed them, physically pushed them off my property. It wasn't anything violent, really. I just got them out of my entrance. But I guess for them it was enough. As I pushed them, I screamed everything I had kept inside for 3 years. I told them I wished they had been in that accident instead of me, that I wished they knew what it felt like to be alone in a hospital begging for your parents to show up, that I wished they felt the pain of realizing you don't matter to anyone in your family. I know it sounds horrible, and it's not something I'm proud of, but in that moment all the pain came out and I couldn't control it. They left screaming that I was crazy, that I was a violent and dangerous person. I closed the door and basically had a complete emotional breakdown. I cried for hours, like those ugly cries where you can't even breathe properly, where your whole body hurts from the effort. It was as if all those 3 years of repressed emotions came out at once. The next day, I got a message from Victoria. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, and her first message was a legal threat. She told me she was going to press charges against me for physical assault on our parents, that she had witnesses, guess the neighbors or something, and that she was going to make sure I faced consequences for my violent behavior. She added that she always knew I was unstable, that the accident had only brought out my true nature, and to stay away from her daughter or she would take legal action too. Honestly, I didn't know what to do. On one hand, technically, I had pushed them, although it wasn't anything serious and they were on my property after I asked them to leave. On the other hand, the idea that Victoria was threatening me after everything that had happened, after she had also abandoned me in the hospital and made me feel a rage I didn't even know I could feel. I talked to one of my friends who studies law, and he told me they probably didn't have a real case, that I have the right to ask people to leave my property, but that I should still be careful. I decided to do nothing. I wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to lie for them. If they wanted to press charges, let them do it, but I wasn't going to bend to their manipulations again. My friends supported me completely. They told me I had done the right thing, that my parents didn't deserve my compassion or my help after what they had done. Isabella's birthday party came and basically nobody went. Of all the extended family they had invited, only 2 people showed up, and that was because they hadn't heard the whole story properly. It was a total disaster. I heard later from Evelyn that Victoria cried the whole party, that Isabella kept asking where her cousins and aunts and uncles were, and that my parents were furious, blaming me for ruining their granddaughter's day. But the family was on the side of truth. Several of my aunts and uncles contacted me afterwards to apologize for judging me without knowing the full story, to tell me they supported my decision to distance myself from my parents. Evelyn called me and we had a long conversation, like 2 hours, where I basically let out everything I had kept inside for 3 years. I told her about the physical pain I still feel sometimes in my arm, about the nightmares I had for months after the accident, about how I felt when I woke up in the hospital and there was nobody from my family there, about all the times I saw other patients with their families and felt completely alone in the world. I cried, she cried. It was cathartic in a way I didn't expect. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like someone in my family really understood me, that someone validated my pain and my decision to distance myself. Evelyn told me I should never have gone through that alone, that my parents had failed in the most fundamental way that parents can fail, and that I didn't have to forgive them if I didn't want to. About a week ago, my parents sent me an email. They didn't really apologize. It was more like a half apology, where they acknowledged that maybe they should have gone to the hospital, but that they were under a lot of stress with Isabella's birth, and that they didn't think clearly at the time. They said they hoped we could leave the past behind and rebuild our family relationship, because family is the most important thing. Not a single mention of all the pain they caused, of the lies they told, of how they tried to manipulate me to lie for them, just excuses, and the expectation that I should forgive them because they're my family. 2 days later, Victoria posted on her social media saying that our family had resolved its differences and that she was grateful the conflict had finally ended. As if with her post, she could erase everything that happened, as if things were fixed just because she said so. In the comments, my parents added that they were happy there was no more family drama and that they hoped we could all move forward. Oh, and they also said they had decided not to press charges against me because they understood I was emotionally upset and wanted to give me another chance, as if they were doing me a favor. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't comment on the post. I just went on with my life. I'm 24 years old. I'm about to graduate from college finally after everything that happened. I have incredible friends who have proven to be more family to me than my own parents, and I'm learning to live with the physical and emotional scars that all of this left. Does it still hurt? Yes, of course it does. It will probably always hurt at some level, but I've learned that you can build a meaningful life even without the family you thought you would have. Evelyn and I talk regularly now. She invited me to spend the next holidays with her part of the family, and that feels good. Like having at least one family connection that isn't contaminated by everything that happened. The rest of my extended family has been mostly understanding. Some still maintain contact with my parents, but respect my decision not to have a relationship with them. The truth is, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, if someday I'll be able to forgive what they did or if I'll just keep living my life without them. What I do know is that I'm not going to lie to protect them. I'm not going to pretend that the abandonment I experienced wasn't real. And I'm not going to let them make me feel guilty for surviving and for demanding the minimum respect that any human being deserves.